Loops. Loops are used in epics when a particular piece of code should be repeated with the desired number of iterations. Epic supports a standard traditional for loop as well as other advanced types of loops. So in this part of our presentation, we will discuss in detail about the loops in epics. A loop statement allows us to execute a statement or a group of statements multiple times, and following is the general form of a loop statement in most of the programming languages. Under the flowchart, we have a table with loop type and description. That table lists down the different loops that handle looping requirements in Epic's programming language. So the for loop is a loop that performs a set of statements for each item in a set of records. A so-called for loop executes a sequence of statements directly over the return set of so-called query. Java-like for loop executes a sequence of statements in traditional Java-like syntax. A while loop repeats a statement or group of statements while a given condition is true. It tests the condition before executing the loop body. Do while loop, like a while statement, except that it tests the condition at the end of the loop body. Now let's review the for loop in epics. A for loop is a repetition control structure that allows us to efficiently write a loop that needs to execute a specific number of times. Consider, for example, a business scenario where we are required to process or update 100 records in one go. And so first we have the syntax in front of us, and the flow chart or the flow diagram demonstrates the path that it takes. So now let's review this example. Consider that we have an invoice object which stores information of the daily invoices like create date, status, and other fields. In this example, we will be fetching the invoice created date and have the status as paid. Note that before executing this example, we would need to create at least one record in the invoice object. At this point, we're going to look at the so-called for loop. This type of for loop is used when we do not want to create the list and directly iterate over the returned set of records of the so-called query. So it returns the list of records and field as given in the query. And as we can see the syntax, either of those we could use, and we'll be discussing SQL in future sessions as well. Now as we look at the flow diagram, one thing to note here is that the variable list or variable should always be the same type as the records returned by the query. In our example, it is of the same type as epics invoice underscore C. And now in this example, we could have a better view of the so-called for loop. Now let's review the Java-like for loop. And as the name indicates, that there is a traditional Java-like for loop available in Epix. And that's the syntax, and we can see from the flow diagram how the passage happens. Now let's closely inspect the following example to understand the usage of the traditional for loop. And as we can see the execution steps, when executing this type of for loop, the Epix runtime engine performs the following steps. Number one, it executes the init statement component of the loop. Note that multiple variables can be declared and or initialized in this statement. And then number two, it performs the exit condition check. If true, the loop continues, and if false, the loop exits. Number three, it executes the code block. Our code block is to print the numbers. Number four, it executes the increment statement, and it will increment each time. And then finally, it returns to step two. As another example, the following code outputs the numbers 1 through 100 into the debug log. Note that an additional initialization variable, j, is included to demonstrate the syntax. And now for a few considerations. Consider the following points while executing this type of for loop statement. Number one, we cannot modify the collection while iterating over it. Suppose you're iterating over a list of invoices, then while iterating, you cannot modify the elements in the same list. Number two, you can add element in the original list while iterating, but you have to keep the elements in the temporary list while iterating and then add those elements to the original list. Now let's review the while loop in Epix. A while loop statement in Epix programming language repeatedly executes a target statement as long as a given condition is true. This is in a way similar to the do while loop, while one major difference. It will execute the code block only when the condition is true. But in the do while loop, even if the condition is false, it will execute the code block at least once. So we can see the syntax. And here, key point of the while loop is that the loop might never run. When the condition is tested and the result is false, the loop body will be skipped and the first statement after the while loop will be executed. And now as we look in the example, we notice that in this example we will implement the same scenario that we did for the do while loop, but this time using the while loop, and it will update the description for 10 rows. Now we're going to look at the do while loop in Epix. Unlike the for and the while loops, which test the loop condition at the top of the loop, the do-while loop checks its conditions at the bottom of the loop. A do-while loop is similar to a while loop, except that a do-while loop is guaranteed to execute at least one time. And as we can see the syntax, the full diagram demonstrates the passage. And then we do have an example for our manufacturing company that will be updating only the first record in the list, not more than that.